Pastor Brad and I were talking this morning. Lifestyle changes is kind of something, it's a new term, and I think it's more concrete than resolution, because when you mess up on a resolution, it feels like you failed, right? You make a lifestyle change, it's like you hit a speed bump, or you got a hiccup, but you're still on the path there. And really, I think what I'm changing in my lifestyle through this 21 days, and I'd really love to hear you guys too, is I'm really stopping to live with an intentionality, to enjoy the life that God has set apart for me and for my family, and truly live life the way God intends, and that is life to the fullest, right? Nobody wants a shallow life. Nobody wants a life halfway in, halfway out. I really want to enjoy life to the fullest. And just in case anyone's unclear, that does not mean he intends for us to live life with no margin in our schedules. We're not talking about a full schedule. We're talking about a full and blessed life. And I would actually choose to disagree with people who might say I'm wrong on that, and say the person with no margin in their schedule is likely missing out on the life that God intends for them, right? Keeping our schedules too busy, these last couple of months, if you've been close to me at all in these last couple of months, you'd be able to tell I've not had much margin in my schedule. And I can be honest with you, I think everyone this whole month of December has been able to tell, because the month as a whole kind of went by as a blur. And I felt the strain of not resting, of not really enjoying life as God intended. I felt the strain in my relationships. All of them, my kids, my marriage, God, my friends. December, I think for many of us, it's packing so much into a small amount of time and just hoping to get to the new year, because when January comes, we can breathe, right? But then we start with these resolutions and we got no room for air. And I think part of that is because the myth of productivity has led us to believe that time rested is time wasted. But I want us to remember something today, and that is activity means nothing if it's void of intentionality. And to take that just a little bit further, activities are more detrimental than beneficial if they cause us to compromise our morals, relationships, or calling. So this year, my challenge for you guys, I'm bringing you in with me. I want us all to focus on treating our time as if it truly were money, right? Fellas, would we enjoy a night out with the guys if it meant draining our bank accounts and coming home to our families with nothing left to take care of them with? Absolutely not. Would we go out and just have the time of our lives and come back completely broke, giving up everything in debt, only to have nothing to sow in to our eternity? The answer has got to be no. And if you answer differently, we might need to have a conversation, and I'll refer you to a counselor. It doesn't make sense why we would give money and leave our families with nothing, so why are we doing it with time? Why are we doing it with our relationship with God? I think so many of us are so busy, and we keep moving from place to place, from thing to thing, and by the time it's all said and done, most of us are giving God our table scraps if we give him anything at all. And I don't want it to sound like I'm preaching down on you guys, because I'm talking to myself too. Pastors can be just as guilty, if not more, than anybody else, trying to do religion rather than be in relationship. And I want to let you guys know, my life this year, I'm going to build on that. The intentionality of prioritizing prayer, prioritizing relationships, and going deeper, not just with the Lord, but with people. Because we are a currency that cannot be traded, cannot be devalued. We were made in the image of God, and that's what it's all about. Amen? I believe that when our priorities shift and our focus is aligned with kingdom values, our prayers progress from monologues to dialogues, right? It's not just us requesting and dumping things at the foot of the Father. Our prayers become conversations. We speak and he listens. When our hearts are aligned with kingdom values, he speaks. He impresses on our hearts. He impresses in our spirit, and we lean in we listen and we're changed. We listen with the intent not to reply, but to respond with our actions, with our heart. One of my favorite books of the Bible, and it might sound a little strange, it's Lamentations. I know it's not as famous as Psalms or Proverbs, but it's a book of lament. It's a book of sorrow, brokenness, and it was written after the Israelites lost their home to the Babylonians. If you read through the book, you might wonder, what the heck is wrong with me? But I'll be honest, it's some of the most unfiltered communication in the Bible. And I think if we're really being honest, it aligns a lot with what we feel but don't like to say. So Lamentations chapter 3, it starts out talking about the brokenness and abandonment that the people feel from God. They're asking things like, how could this happen? Why did this happen? God, how could you let us get this far? How could you let us go without? And as the author's working his way through these thoughts, the memories of all of the uncertainty and the suffering just continue to boil over. But in the middle of this reflective anguish, we see an unusual twist in the narrative. In verse 21, he's going through this whole list of how the Lord is abandoned and feels so broken. And then in verse 21, it says, despite all of this, I call this to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's faithful love, we do not perish, for his mercies never end. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will put my hope in him. That's good stuff, right? That's something you'd put on a t-shirt. But you don't want to go before that verse because that t-shirt might have someone asking how your mental state is, right? How's your mental focused? Oh, it's focused, right? But in the middle of the storms, in the chaos of life, I just find it so interesting how the fullness of God is called to mind. The focus for the first 20 verses is how the world is falling apart. But then we land here, and God's faithfulness is brought to memory. And it makes me ask, why? It feels completely illogical and backwards from what we should be seeing in the text. And as I read through this and I continued to ask why, I came to the realization that I think most of our prayer lives look like chapter 3 in reverse. Let me put it like this. I think most of us probably start our year off with, God, I'm so thankful for what you've done in my life. Thank you for your faithfulness. I can't wait to see what the year looks like in the coming days. And I can't wait. Lord, you are my portion. I receive everything that you have. I will count on you. That's what January looks like, right? But request after request after request goes up, and it feels like the thing we're requesting is on an indefinite back order. By the time we get to March, that firm, faithful foundation we were standing on just a couple of months ago begins to crumble beneath our feet. And it feels like the longer we go without a response to our prayer, the more questions we raise. The weaker our resolve tends to get. But I want you guys to be honest. Again, I'm not coming down on you because I don't think there's much that we can really do about it. Because as a society, we're programmed in the way of instant gratification. No fuss, no lines, no wait, just results. As I was thinking through that, I really like to push back against my inner. You should really see me. I look like a madman when I'm putting sermons together because God convicts me and I'm in complete denial for 90% of the writing, and then finally it just lands. But God kind of hit me with the realization as I was I literally was staring out the window waiting for an Amazon truck. I kid you not. And I started thinking about the good old pre-COVID days, right? When Amazon guaranteed 2 days or less, and sometimes you might even get it in the same day. Now it feels like I'm sacrificing a limb or signing over the rights to my children if I have to say I'll wait 3 or 4 days for a package, right? That was God just being like, dude, you really think you're not impatient? You're staring out your window like a puppy waiting for the Amazon truck. It wasn't even anything good. Like, it was cleaning supplies. I could have gone to Walmart. I live less than a mile away. But I think that that's the progression that most of us see in our lives. I think most of us start out so excited, and when things begin to deteriorate, we begin to wither up, close off, and abort. But what we see here in Lamentations 3 is complete opposite. Everything at the beginning of this chapter is telling him he should not be counting on the Lord's faithfulness. This guy sounds like somebody who's about to do something rash. But I think the more I read it, it shows me something that I think could be of use for all of us today. I know as I was making my way through the Word, I kept coming back to this, and I kept asking the question, Lord, I see in my life that I'm living this in reverse, but how can they, despite the trouble and brokenness, continue to have such a faith and keep on believing? Because I got to be honest with you guys. You might not be there, because I'm sure you guys are all pillars of faith who never waver. But there are times in my life when I look at the circumstances before me and I just don't see a possible solution that ends favorably. But then God continued to draw my eyes to verse 24, and I think it clears a lot of this up. And this is where I want to spend the next couple of minutes today. Verse 24 says, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the person who seeks him." I remember as a kid, my mom would always tell me, patience is a virtue, Zachary. Actually, it was more like, patience is a virtue, Zachary. Zachary, there's a lot of emphasis on the R in Zachary. It's not the dominant letter, but she likes it. Zachary. I had no idea what that meant at the time, but what it felt like it meant was, you'll get it when you get it. If you get it, leave me alone, right? Any parents ever been there? I don't use patience as a virtue. I pretty much just tell them, leave me alone, stop harassing me. I'm calling the cops. We used to have a police officer that lived 2 doors down at our old house, and we used to just say, we're gonna go get Mr. John. That cleared things up quite a bit, but since we've moved, my kids have become lawless renegades. But I remember my mom always telling me, you gotta be patient, you gotta wait. Good things come to those who wait. And now, as a man with 5 of my own children, I've discovered that nothing has really changed. I still hate waiting. I hate waiting so much, I stare out the Amazon truck and complain to my wife about how miserable my life is having to wait. And bless my wife, she is a saint. If you've not met her, she sings like an angel, but her heart is even sweeter because she puts up with me, the overgrown baby of the house that doesn't like waiting, doesn't like cold food, and doesn't like germs. So she's constantly handing me a wipe, and she's constantly bringing me something to eat or drink. I'm telling you, it's bad. Me and Nemo, it's a fight for who's the baby. But I want to turn this question to you guys. I don't like waiting. Do you guys enjoy waiting for something that you feel is quite urgent? If anyone in here tells me yes, I will call you a bald-faced liar, okay? You are not. Nobody has met someone who just says, you know, I really enjoy waiting. It's one of my favorite parts of life. Because waiting goes against all of our natural instincts, right? Waiting is a prolonged response to an immediate need. But what if I told you guys that the waiting Lamentations 3:24 talks about, it's not just biding time and waiting as you and I like to wait. It's counting down moments before that hope becomes a reality, all the while staying grounded in our belief that it's going to happen. See, the belief here that is talked about, it's a steadfast belief that something incredible and out of this world will happen. And it's a trust that God will allow it to happen in our lives when it's most beneficial for us. So you guys watched last week's live stream. You might have caught a little bit of alliteration. You guys, if you've heard me preach for any length of time, you should know I really like alliteration. It's one of my favorite literary devices. I told you guys last week that prayer is a persistent pursuit. And in the theme of waiting, we're going to roll out one this week and another alliteration next week just because I really love to do it. Today, I want to let you guys know prayer is not just a persistent pursuit. Prayer is a patient pursuit. There's a word that they used in this time called quava. There's no direct replacement for it in the English language. But I think we might need to put this into our vocabulary because the word quava means to be bound together with the object of our waiting, with an expectation and hope. Best way I can visualize it, I did a wedding back in October, and they did the unity knot. 3 strands tied together cannot be easily broken or compromised. And it's us being wound together with the Lord and His calling for our lives in 3 strands. Or another way we could see it is our waiting being intertwined with hope and expectation. Meaning as time continues to pass, the rope grows longer, thus growing stronger and harder to break. So with the word quava in mind, of being intertwined with the object of our waiting, there's a very famous verse that many of you guys have probably heard that begins to make a little bit more sense. Isaiah 40:31, it says, "Those who wait in the Lord will find new strength." I always wondered how waiting in the Lord can give us new strength. And growing up, I was taught some strange things sometimes. And one thing I was taught is that when you wait in the Lord, you're brought to a state of complete dependence, and it makes you stronger because God does it for you. And that's a really interesting thought. I don't even know if I'd say that's sweet, but it's inaccurate. This verse says, those who wait in the Lord will find new strength, meaning the longer we wait, the longer we quava, the longer we're intertwined with our hope and expectation that God is going to pull us through, the stronger our faith gets because of a never-ending belief that God is going to do something in us and through us. Amen. You see, the reason I think the author of Lamentations 3 could recount his brokenness only to immediately go back to experiencing comfort in God's faithfulness is because as he waited, his hope and his expectation grew around his need. As he waited, God's purpose and presence enveloped his heart, and he was filled with hope. I want you guys to think back on your own lives today, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that can say there are seasons I distinctly remember that felt like an absolute eternity of waiting, right? Counting down the days, hoping, waiting, and seeing little evidence of what was ahead, but knowing that God had something bigger in store for my story at some point. Sure, you guys can remember some of those moments in your own lives. I know as I look at some of you, I remember walking through some of those moments with you guys, holding out hope that something in you couldn't have come unless the Lord filled you. Evidence might have suggested you take your ball and go home, but the faith inside of you, the voice of the Lord whispered into your heart to keep holding on. And it called to remembrance the promise of Psalm 25, verse 3. It says, "Indeed, none of those who wait for you will be ashamed." Guys, I want you to know there's no shame in waiting. There's no shame in asking. The only issues that we face in life is when we ask and walk away before the Lord has a chance to respond. I know naturally this sounds pretty good, Pastor. I'd love to wait, I'd love to grow in that quava thing you're talking about, but how do I do it? I think first and foremost, as we're talking through prayer, I don't think we need to enter prayer because of what we hope to get out of it. I think that it's important to enter prayer with no agenda because hope comes in our waiting. But waiting only comes when we find ourselves resting in the presence of God. It's important to remember as we lift up our prayers and as we lift up our praise, He's not some magical genie. He's not Santa Claus. We don't sit on His lap and give Him our list of demands. I think that if we want to experience the hopeful expectation that faith produces, we have to know the one we're trusting in. If we're only coming Him with our hands open, waiting to receive something, we'll never know the gift of simply being in His presence, being seen and known by the Creator of the universe. Think of any relationship you guys have ever been in. Romantic, friendship, parental. How do your friendships grow? It's by spending time being real, being vulnerable. Our eyes and our hearts are opened to a whole new world when our desire is intimacy, not currency. When our desire is to spend time with God for who He is, not for what we can draw from Him. I want us to begin to posture our prayers like that because our lives will take on a whole new identity when our intention is to connect with no agenda. But I also know that there are few things more deflating than trying to spend time with someone and knowing that they're completely distracted and uninvested in what's happening. I'll be the first to admit I have a tendency to zone out, whip out my phone, and scroll through Facebook. And most of the time, it's Lindsay's memes that get me. She trips me up all the time. They're hilarious. Before I realize it, I'm scrolling through, and I'm like, what am I even doing right now? No one wants to be distracted when they're trying to have a conversation. But the truth is, we live in a sensory-driven world. If you don't believe me, I'd like to know how many of you guys have checked or gone on your phones since service started. And don't lie to me, I can see you all from up here. More than should have. And I'll be honest with you, normally on a Sunday morning, my watch gives me about 5 or 6 alerts that have to do with football or taking a deep breath. And I forgot my watch today, so I feel weird not being distracted up here today. But I remember I'd sit down in my prayer time. You guys might know this. I'd play a little bit of music. Back in the day, it was on like an MP3 player, which I didn't have to worry about being distracted on. Some of you, it might have been a record player. Some of you, it might have just been like a swing band in your front yard. I don't know what generation some of you guys are from. But then it turned to playing it on my phone. And then it turned into, I'm going to play it on my phone, but I'm going to hold on to my phone just in case a call comes through, but I'm really focused on praying. And then it turned into, I'm going to read a devotion during my prayer time. And then, look, I'm going to swipe through. There's a Bleacher Report update on the AFC standings. See, it turned on to all sorts of different things. That was true. That just happened. God has great timing. What I found is that as I tried to find excuses to lean in a way that was more convenient to me, I continued to push myself further from intimacy, and I began to distract myself. Before I could even realize it, I disconnected myself completely, and I was going through empty, hollow motions. I think it's important for us to really have the ability to grow and wait in the Lord with a hopeful expectation of things to come. And I think that in order to do so, we have to remove the distractions so we can actually hear the voice of the one who's been speaking promises and purpose over our lives since before we were ever born. I think as we begin to change our habits and our prayer changes posture, we'll discover that prayer is so much more meaningful when we come to the Father with no agenda, no distraction, but also no limitations. No limits on our prayer. I know there always seems to be this sense of urgency in the world. pretty much every area. I know for me it goes work, wife, kids, fantasy football, bowling league, friend. Yes, I do bowl. Don't laugh at me. I'm very good. Friends, family. No matter the day or the hour, it feels like there are always a million different things breathing down my neck. And I'm sure that works for you guys too, because I've heard how busy some of you guys are. Sometimes I'll shoot a text, like, hey, you got a minute? I got 7 minutes between this time and this time. Can you make it fast? No, I can't make it fast. You know me. Or the first time I had to preach in a church that wasn't mine, they told me I had 15 minutes to deliver the word. I said, what word? They said, 15 minutes is an introduction. I said, I'm not even done telling you who I am in 15 minutes. I've gotten a little better, not much. Talking on the phone, we're answering emails and texts, and we're scrolling through our phones, looking at our feeds or watching TV in the middle of casual conversations. I saw something on Instagram the other day, and I thought it was so spot on, and it said how Gen Z looks being productive. Kids sitting on a computer with a Nintendo Switch next to him, with an iPad playing a video, with his phone out texting, all while trying to fill out spreadsheets. We've masked productivity with confusion. We don't like the sound of silence because that means we might actually hear something on the other side. So we fill up all of the voids in our lives with noise, with buffers, with fillers, and before we realize it, yeah, I'm typing, I'm doing my work, I got my phone open, I'm answering messages, I got a TV on here, I got a podcast playing, I got 2 different cups of coffee, one hot and one iced, just in case I change my mind midway through. God, speak to me. Why can't I hear you? We can't hear him because we've placed limits on where we allow him to speak and what we allow him to do in our lives. When our faith becomes convenient, it becomes artificial. Faith was never made to be the easy road. The word says repeatedly, it's a long, narrow road. If it was easy, we'd all be doing it. If following Jesus was as simple as sitting here with 10 things going at once while I'm simultaneously playing a prayer track in the background, that's not prayer. That's distraction. That's illusion. Guys, I want you to know it's time for us to be serious with God. And again, I don't want it to sound like I'm coming down on you, but there's a sense of urgency that I cannot stress enough. Take a look at the news. Take a look at your news feed. There is chaos and confusion everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's local school board elections. It doesn't matter if it's in Washington. It doesn't matter if it's in Ukraine or Albania or Romania or wherever the heck your attention is. There is something happening somewhere, and the enemy wants to distract us from the sound of God's voice. We have to enter into God's presence with no agenda. I don't want us to say, God, this is what I got. What you got for me today, big fella? I don't want us to enter in to prayer, holding our phone, waiting to receive something while God's hands are outstretched, ready to give us something that we don't have the capacity to bring in. And I don't want us to sit here and say, God, I know you've done a lot of really great things, but I simply don't have the time. I made that type of a statement before. Carr Bennett, if you guys don't know Carr is one of the wisest people I know, and he's been a strong advisor of mine for a lot of years. And I remember I had a conversation where he said, you've got to be able to carve out at least an hour. He said, I'd be willing to challenge that you could carve out an hour. And I said, I don't think there's an hour anywhere in there. And he said, I don't believe that. And I'm telling you guys, you want to see a busy schedule? Look at Carr Bennett's schedule. I'm pretty sure he's half robot. The man lives insane, but he always has margin for something. And that's the way I want us to approach our relationship with God. Don't tell me you don't have time for undivided attention for the Lord. If you're going to get a phone call or a text message, just do like I do. Don't answer them. I've got 200 unread right now. If that's one of you guys, I'm sorry. I really try, but I don't do a good job. God's asking us for his attention. God's asking us to give him time. He's asking us to give him our devotion, our dedication. And I think too often we say, God, I don't have that hour. In the words of Carr Bennett, I'd like to challenge that. I think we do have the time, but I think we're scared of what we'll hear when we make the time. I think we're afraid that if we give God our undivided, selfless, no agenda type of attention, it might require us to do something that looks different than what we want to do. And how many of us know nobody wants to do something that they don't want to do? But how many of us can also say we always grow from the uncomfortable moments? Change never comes from complacency, it comes from a challenge. Depth never comes from standing on the edge looking down. Often, in order to see what God has for you there, you have to take the plunge and trust that what he has there is far better than what's here. But you'll never know unless you take that next step. I want you guys to understand, last week we talked about prayer being persistent. We have to continually come to the Lord in prayer. But I want you guys to understand today, it's about patience. I'm coming, Lord, every day. I'm coming to you undivided. My heart begins to shift day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour. And the more time we come, the more persistent we are with our prayer, the more our heart begins to shift. And in that patience, we're intertwined with a hope and an expectation that it doesn't matter how long I wait, because in the waiting, I'm still growing closer to you. In the waiting, my need becomes less apparent because I am depending on you. Church, I want to ask you guys today, do you have the time? Can you spare a minute or two to wait on the Lord? There may be urgent requests, that's one thing. I'm talking about growing in the depths with the Father today. I'd like to say I challenge that time. Who's willing to wait? Who's willing to trust? Who's willing to be bound together with the hopeful expectation that what God has done then, he will continue to do now? We serve a God of the impossible, but there's one thing that God cannot do. God cannot make you give him the attention. You have to do that. I want you guys to understand today that when we do, I'll give you a money-back guarantee. I don't know what that'll look like, but if you come to me and say your life has not changed by spending consistent time in the presence of God, I'll give you something. It might be a slap in the face and say, try harder. I don't know. But I want to let you guys know, prayer changes things, but only when that prayer is free of agendas, free of distractions, and free of limitations. Would you guys pray with me?